Okay, hello. So welcome back to Audit's History, number one rival to Heimlich's history, as you all know. So today we're going to be going over 13.3, which is about decolonization. And on my phone, I just have like the vocab and the guiding questions. So I'll go over them as I go through this. So basically, what 13.3 is all about is decolonization. What is decolonization? All the decolonization is that it was the gradual like independence of all these people of all these all different countries and whatever from the colonial governments and authorities. And the thing is with the decolonization, it happens as basically the end of the idea of the empire in history comes about. And that's because the idea of empire becomes just seen as like very invalid and just not really a thing as that makes sense anymore. Because like today, if you, everybody kind of has this idea that people should be able to have their own like countries like different people, and they shouldn't be subject to some greater empire or whatever. But that's not really that much of an idea before. But this idea that people deserve to be able to govern themselves is called national self determination, or yeah. So self determination. This idea plays a major role in decolonization because everybody wants self determination. Okay, I can't write. I can't spell. But everybody wants to be able to govern themselves, and because they think that they deserve to be able to govern themselves rather than be subject to the foreign colonial authorities. And the thing is, it's not this the breakup of these empires isn't quite the same as the other empires breaking up in the past. So a ton of empires fall in the 20th century. You have the Austro-Hungarian Empire and the Ottoman Empire in World War One. You have German, Japanese. These empires, they're all collapsing, and and as a result, well, in the USSR, the USSR eventually forms from the Russian Empire ending, but the German Empire, Austro-Hungarian Empire, these lead to the creation of lots and lots of new independent states, and all of these states believe that they have the right to kind of govern themselves rather than be subject to their like overlords who are governing them. And the the thing is that as people emerge from the end of colonialism, there's a difference from the collapse of other empires. The difference is that these people have had their cultures trampled upon for many, many years, and now they're seeking to reaffirm that sense of cultural identity through decolonization, that we have our own distinct, like, cool, good culture and all. And that's why there's a lot of like cultural revival movements and whatnot throughout this time. So it's not quite the same. In addition, so the thing is, self determination is one of the reasons for decolonization, but self determination was not necessarily a new idea in the colonies. So why was it that this started happening? Why were other reasons why people wanted independence, and why did that happen? So first of all, one major reason is that you have the hypocrisy of European countries in basically imposing dictatorships ruled by like the governor or whatever of the colony, and having complete autocracy while Europe is moving towards democracy, and also it completely contradicts European values because the Christianity, it's completely opposed to the kind of racism and discrimination that was experienced by these people in the colonies. And similarly, the Enlightenment principles that people have natural rights is completely ignored in the colonies, and the Enlightenment principles of people having like a voice in their government similarly ignored with all the autocracy in the colonies. So there's kind of just like this hypocrisy, and that's a big factor. But why was it that despite this going on for so long that it only like in world after World War II that they started getting independence? Thing is, the one major reason is that, so you know those Western educated elites we talked about in the past, right? They initially, many of these educated elites believed that they could work together with the colonial government to modernize their country, make it like all European, all like cool and modern. But that that didn't really work out. The European colonial authorities kind of just ignored them, and now over time, now there's like the second, third generation of these elites, and they realize that it's just not going to work out. Um, and the thing is, they now have a further like a deeper understanding of European culture or values, and they believe that they need to work towards independence rather than simply working with the colonial authorities. And many of them began to demand independence immediately. And this message of independence really resonates with a lot of people in the colonies. For example, many people who had fought in like the world wars, who are veterans of these wars, they believed that they had kind of earned the right to govern themselves. And many people who are in rural areas who had been forced to, who had been subject to this forced labor and things like that, they wanted to govern themselves. They didn't want to be subject to these colonial authorities. So that's kind of one reason. Another reason why is that um, after the world wars, Europe was kind of in shambles because many of these countries were suffering economically, and also there was just widespread like destruction of across all of Europe. It costs a lot to run a colony, and it also costs a lot to rebuild after two of the most destructive wars in history. And so it's just they don't have the money to be running a colony. So there's like there's economic reasons as well. Why can I not spell? So there's economic reasons. So for example, as a result, many of these colonies are going to try like making negotiations and talking with their colonial authorities so that they can both figure out an agreement which works for them, and then they can start to get independence. Another thing is that, and it is a bit more minor, but like many people in the colonies had kind of seen Europeans as like this moral like high ground, not having this moral high ground. But the world wars were so deadly with all these Europeans killing each other, and that removes any idea of any moral superiority that these Europeans might have had. Um, and another major thing is that there were a lot of movements within these colonies. So there are lots of movements, and I'll go back to these in a moment. But I just want to revisit here when I said that with the economic things, where I mentioned that many European governments entered negotiations with the colonies to figure out work to begin figuring out a solution that worked for all of them. And the thing with that is that as a result of this, many European governments began to gradually give more rights to their colonies. And that's through, for example, maybe they'd create like a parliament, some sort of legislature basically, and maybe they'd give people the ability to vote, to have some people in their government. Maybe they'd give people, so giving people a voice in the government, they'd also build critical infrastructure such as railroads and telegraph lines, etc. So slowly moving them away towards independence. So that's basically the role that these colonial governments played in helping them move to independence. Similarly, when I talked about these movements, right? So with that, these are kind of nationalist movements founded on this idea of nationalism, and so there's many like different leaders who basically give this idea of this nationalism. Let me just pause. Okay, I kind of realized that all of the for some reason it was like looking really bright, the board, so I've basically turned off nearly all of my lights now. Hopefully it'll be a little bit better now and it'll be readable. I don't know why it looks so bright in the video. So anyways, going back to this, so we were talking about these nationalist movements, right? And so with the nationalist movements, the thing with these is that they are often led by kind of just like these like kind of like charismatic leader figures who are often called these fathers of the nation. And these so the examples are like Gandhi in India, and you have people you have other kinds of people in other countries with a similar thing. So, okay, so thing is that with these nationalist movements are founded by these figures who become quote unquote known as like father figures, basically. And so these leaders kind of have like a pretty big task ahead of them. They got to like recruit people to their political parties and like get people and to work with them. And kind of a problem is that a lot of that these colonies are not so united. And so there's a lot of different like rivaling groups with different ideas about how the country should be governed and all. And so, but eventually these nationalist movements national they put a lot of pressure, and combined with the economic factors as I mentioned previously, they a lot of these European countries begin to start doing these reforms in their colonies. But these so a good example of the nationalist movement is in India with the Indian National Congress, which was a political party, and a very important leader in the party was Mohandas Gandhi, and Gandhi was a pretty major leader, and he encouraged nonviolent protest and things like that. But as I mentioned previously, there was a lot of division. Some people didn't agree with Gandhi's idea that nonviolent protest was the way that India would get independence. So there was that conflict. Similarly, Gandhi didn't want to focus on having India be industrialized, and whereas in contrast, one of the main figures in the Congress Party was Nehru, who was and the thing is, he wanted to create a very modernized, industrialized India. So as you can see, there's a lot of conflict within these like different movements about how things are going to end up working. And let's see what. So our next guiding question is what challenges independence movements faced. And so, one major challenge, as I mentioned just now, was that these opposition. And continuing with the opposition, the fact is in India, there was a big problem with religious conflict because Muslims were a very big religious minority in India, and they as and they kind of feared that India was going to be dominated by the Hindus because they had a lot more numbers, and they due to this fear, the Muslim League was formed, led by Jinnah, which basically said that India should be split into two, with the Muslim dominated areas being called Pakistan. And so then you have the creation of. So then eventually the agreement, this agreement will come and India will be partitioned into two. The Congress Party agrees with the Muslim League. They partition India into two, and because of the rising violence and there's a lot of conflict among the Muslims and Hindus, and this is a pretty major problem. Eventually, India gets partitioned, and as Muslims flee into Pakistan, Hindus in what's now Pakistan flee into or Bangladesh flee into India, then there's a lot of violence. Many people are killed, and it's a pretty terrible situation all around. So this is a pretty major problem. In addition, not all of the colonial governments were so willing to give up their colonies. For example, a lot of the settler colonies were a lot more reluctant to try and move to a better to give rights to their colonies. As a result of this, countries, for example, Algeria, will have to fight against their colonial lords. So Algeria had to fight against France in a pretty bloody war, and so there were a lot of difficulties. And so let's see. So, the, so now let's talk about the democracies or the aftermath, like democracy versus authoritarianism in these colonies, right? So once these colonies get their independence, the question is how are they going to be governed, right? So after the European are going to leave, they tried to establish some sort of basis for democracy to be continued in the colonies. And so usually it's some sort of they establish some sort of legislature, something like that. And the the best example of this working is in India. India has had a functional multi-party democracy for quite a while, although things like even if things like corruption and all did exist, it was still a multi-party democracy with multiple with a legislature working pretty well. But in contrast, not all the countries did a great job of keeping their democracy for various reasons. Um, this is where you're this is where you're gonna have things like the big man dictatorships, where you have some sort of person who basically has complete control over the country. And the question is why is dictatorship so why is it so prevalent in the colonies? Thing is that a lot of these parties that formed immediately after that carried the countries to independence, they soon lost popular support for various reasons. Things like the economy being bad and many other reasons led to people and things like class conflict. Many people wanted some sort of solution to these problems, and they didn't see that solution coming from democracy. So many countries will gravitate towards authoritarianism. Let's see. Am I missing any vocab words? Nope. So what's going to happen is a lot of countries will be pretty authoritarian, and some will have military role. Some will have the big man role. But overall, many countries will be autocratic, while some will have technically have democracies, but basically be autocracies. But what happens is that going into the end of the 1900s, we have the last vocab term, which is the globalization of democracy. And the globalization of democracy is just democracy spreading all across the world and many more countries embracing democracy. And this happens for a couple of reasons. First of all, democracy was initially seen as a very like Western idea that was kind of foreign, but going into the end of the 20th century, democracy comes to be seen as a more universal thing, similar to how feminism started off being seen as like a Western thing and later spread and things like that. So there's that idea that it's no longer such a foreign thing. And but another thing is that dictatorships simply failed at their promises. Dictatorships promised that they would improve the economy and that they would secure a better future essentially. But the dictatorships don't do that. Many dictatorships are just like, oh, like we'll give you more representation in the government future. Trust me, bro. But they don't end up doing that. So as a result, many people will gravitate towards democracy because its autocracy has simply failed to do what they wanted. And that's pretty much all of it, I think. Yeah. Oh, actually, there's a question which is about the difference between a couple of different independence movements. So basically, West Africa, the independence movements there were focused around like leaders basically rallying people towards like peaceful protests. For example, in West Africa, there were lots of strikes and all, and so, worker strikes. So that's the big thing in West Africa. In Algeria, in stark contrast to West Africa, they had to fight a war where a very bloody guerrilla war, and they eventually they won against the French colonial forces. India, I described previously. Had India had a slow transition to democracy there, where they basically had a lot of where they had like Gandhi with his peaceful protests and whatever. Um, and then the last one is Indonesia. Indonesia, what happened there was that they had a lot of they had a lot of tension between, in contrast to the other countries where the leaders of these independence nationalist movements were very closely linked to the people. In Indonesia, they had a thing where a lot of the leaders of the Indonesian movement felt very alienated from the common people, with one of the leaders describing the Indonesian one as as basically that he felt closer to Europe and the Europeans and Americans in terms of culture than the normal people and their and their Islamic culture. And another thing is there's also let's see, there's South Africa. South Africa, technically, like politically, they got independent in 1910 from the British, but with South Africa, we don't really consider them to have had decolonialization and real like independence until the 1990s when apartheid was abolished and they overthrew the government. Because the thing is that it was just ruled by that small elite of the white settlers, which was only comprising a small minority of the population and oppressing the rest. Anyways, bye.